Captain Zixtal paced the command deck, her forearms clasped behind her back in what her crew recognized as a sign of extreme agitation. The Lumina's asterisk engines, magnificent quantum propulsion systems capable of bending space-time itself, sat dormant despite days of diagnostic attempts. "Status report," she demanded, her voice carrying the harmonics of authority that distinguished Voxarian command officers. Science Officer Krellmore's skin flickered with patterns of embarrassment. "All systems continue to register as functional, Captain. Yet we remain immobile." "Impossible," Zixtal snapped. "The quantum core cannot simultaneously be operational and non-responsive." The bridge fell silent as the implications settled in. The Lumina represented the pinnacle of Voxarian engineering, a perfect synthesis of crystalline computing and quantum mechanics. Systems redundancies existed in layers so numerous that total failure was considered mathematically impossible. The ship's neural network should have identified and rectified any conceivable malfunction automatically. Could it be sabotage? Security Officer Vrendak suggested, her hand never straying far from her ceremonial phase disruptor. "Unlikely," replied Krellmore. "Our quantum entanglement barriers have remained intact. No unauthorized consciousness has interfaced with our systems." Navigation Officer Trenval looked up from her console, her elongated fingers trembling slightly. "Captain, I've been analyzing our position. We are approximately 12.7 light cycles from the nearest Voxarian outpost. Our emergency beacon would take at least 3 standard months to reach them." "And our life support systems?" Zixtal asked. "Functioning at optimal levels," replied Krellmore. "We have sufficient resources for 157 days, assuming current consumption patterns." Zixtal moved to the viewing portal, watching the gas giant's swirling atmosphere below them. Their current orbit was stable, but the planet's complex gravitational relationship with its moons meant that stability wouldn't last indefinitely. "Communications Officer Lithmar," she said finally, "prepare the universal distress signal." A collective gasp rippled through the bridge. "Captain," protested Lithmar, his skin pulsing with alarmed patterns, "the High Council's directives are explicit. We are to avoid contact with non-Voxarian species unless absolutely necessary." "I am well aware of the directives," Zixtal replied coldly. "Would you prefer we maintain our cultural isolation while drifting into the atmosphere of a gas giant?" No one responded. The use of a universal distress signal was more than a request for assistance. It was an admission of vulnerability that ran counter to centuries of Voxarian protocol. Their species had evolved from solitary crystalline entities that joined together only for specific purposes. Asking for help was not merely uncomfortable, it was almost physically painful. "Very well," said Lithmar after a moment. "Configuring the signal now." The broadcast went out on all frequencies, encoded in the mathematical language recognized by most spacefaring species. The bridge crew waited in tense silence, each member retreating into their personal consciousness space, a meditative state that allowed Voxarians to process discomfort. Exactly 47 minutes later, Lithmar's console chimed with an incoming transmission. "We are receiving a response," he announced, his voice carrying both relief and apprehension. "Source?" Zixtal demanded. "Unknown vessel approaching from the third moon. Primitive propulsion signature. Not in our database." Visual confirmation. A holographic display materialized in the center of the bridge, showing a vessel so aesthetically offensive that several crew members averted their eyes. The ship appeared to be constructed from mismatched metals, with visible welding seams and exposed external components. Rather than the elegant crystalline symmetry of Voxarian design, this vessel seemed almost deliberately irregular, with strange protrusions and apparently random placement of sensor arrays. "Sentient species identification?" Zixtal asked, maintaining her composure despite the visual assault. "Processing biometric signatures now," Lithmar replied. After a moment, his skin pulsed with recognition patterns. "Humans. Oxygen brothers. Carbon-based. Technological development level classified as mid-range. Spacefaring capability approximately 300 cycles. Interstellar capability less than 100 cycles. They are hailing us, he added, sounding surprise. Audio only. Put it through, ordered Zixtal. The voice that filled the bridge had a harmonic range that Voxarians found peculiarly limited, as though only partially utilizing available sound frequencies. Rusty Wrench responding to your distress call. This is Captain Abby Martinez. Looks like you folks could use a hand with some good old-fashioned elbow grease. Permission to dock. The ship's translation matrix struggled momentarily with the idiom, finally rendering elbow grease as physical exertion applied to mechanical problems. A concept so archaic that the Voxarian language had no direct equivalent. What does it mean by hand? Whispered Navigation Officer Trenval. Surely they don't intend to manipulate our systems physically. Captain Zixtal straightened to her full height, nearly 3 meters of crystalline infused biology, designed for both intellectual and physical superiority. With no viable alternatives, she made the decision that would alter the course of Voxarian history. This is Captain Zixtal of the Voxarian exploration vessel Lumina. We accept your assistance. Docking coordinates are being transmitted. The words tasted strange in her mouth, an admission that centuries of Voxarian technological evolution had culminated in a failure that apparently required the assistance of beings who still used physical tools. Jake Reynolds squinted at the complex crystalline components beneath the access panel, whistling low under his breath. The Voxarian technology was unlike anything he'd encountered in 15 years of salvage operations, where human ships had clearly defined systems: electrical, hydraulic, propulsion. The luminous components seemed to blend into one another, the boundaries between systems more theoretical than physical. This is like trying to repair a nervous system, not a machine, he muttered to Tanya, who was kneeling beside him. Security Officer Vrendax loomed over them, her 4 arms crossed in a posture that even the humans could recognize as disapproval. Our systems are not designed for manual manipulation, she said, the translation matrix struggling to convey her disdain. You risk damaging delicate quantum entanglement patterns. Jake sat back on his heels, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, a gesture that caused several Voxarians to flinch at what they perceived as unhygienic behavior. Look, he said patiently, I understand your concern, but your diagnostic systems are part of the same network that's malfunctioning. It's like asking someone with a concussion to diagnose their own brain injury. Captain Zixtal, who had been observing silently, stepped forward. Explain this methodology you propose. Captain Martinez, sensing a diplomatic opportunity, moved to Jake's side. Think of it like this, Captain. Your systems are integrated, everything connected to everything else. That's elegant and efficient when working properly, but it means you can't isolate the problem. We humans still use compartmentalized systems for this exact reason. Intentional inefficiency. Science Officer Krellmore asked, his voice containing harmonics of genuine curiosity beneath the condescension. We call it redundancy, Martins replied with a smile. Different systems, different materials, different operating principles. When one fails, the others keep working. Jake pulled a small device from his tool bag and held it up. This is a simple electrical tester, no quantum computing, no neural interface, just basic physics. The Voxarians exchanged glances, their skin patterns shifting through colors that the humans couldn't fully interpret. Finally, Captain Zixtal made a gesture that appeared to be their equivalent of a nod. Proceed, she said, but Vrendax will monitor your actions. Jake grinned. Fair enough. Tanya, hand me the flex light. What followed was a methodical exploration of the luminous systems that gradually transfixed the watching Voxarians. Despite their apparent primitiveness, the humans moved with practiced efficiency, using tools and techniques that seemed almost archaic yet proved surprisingly effective. Devin Parker, the electrician, found himself surrounded by curious Voxarian engineers as he traced power pathways using nothing more complex than a multimeter and his own senses. You can detect energy fluctuations without instrumentation. One engineer asked, skin flickering with disbelief. Devin shrugged. Sometimes you can feel a transformer vibrating wrong before any sensor would pick it up, or smell ozone when insulation starts to fail. You use olfactory senses for technical diagnosis. The concept seemed to both horrify and fascinate them. Meanwhile, Dr. Leah Anderson was engaged in a rapidly escalating technical discussion with Science Officer Krellmore. Despite their different approaches, they were finding common ground in the underlying physics. Your propulsion theory is fascinating, she admitted, studying a holographic display of the quantum drive. But there's an elegant simplicity to occasionally hitting something with a hammer. The moment of true breakthrough came when Jake finally identified the source of the luminous malfunction. Crawling out from a maintenance shaft that the Voxarians insisted wasn't designed for organic bodies, his jumpsuit now stained with an iridescent fluid, he held up what appeared to be a crystal formation the size of his fist. "Found your problem," he announced triumphantly. "Coolant crystallization in the primary heat exchange matrix. Your sensors read it as part of the system structure rather than an obstruction." Captain Zixtal moved closer, her four eyes focusing intensely on the formation. "Impossible. The coolant is programmed with decrystallization algorithms specifically to prevent such formations." Jake shrugged. "Programs fail, especially when they've never encountered a specific problem before." He tossed the crystal from hand to hand, a casual treatment of Voxarian technology that made several crew members emit high-pitched sounds of distress. This little beauty formed slowly, probably over years, each layer thin enough that your sensors accepted it as normal. But eventually, he mined an explosion with his free hand, complete blockage. No coolant flow, systems overheating, emergency shutdown. A physical solution to a digital problem, Captain Martinez summarized, watching understanding dawn across the Voxarian faces. "We would have waited for system failure and replacement," admitted Krellmore reluctantly. "The thought of physical intervention never occurred to us." "That's the thing about space travel," Jake said, placing the crystal carefully into a sample container at Krellmore's request. "No matter how advanced your tech gets, sometimes you still need someone willing to crawl into the dark places with a flashlight and some basic tools." The Voxarians exchanged glances that contained, for the first time, something approaching respect for their human visitors. With Captain Zixtal's reluctant approval, the humans began implementing their repair plan. The Lumina's vast engineering section, normally a temple of silent efficiency where maintenance drones performed their duties with perfect precision, transformed into something resembling a chaotic workshop. Jackson Taylor, the systems specialist, established what he called a command center using nothing more sophisticated than a portable terminal and several handwritten diagrams taped to a bulkhead. This seemingly primitive approach horrified the Voxarian engineers until they realized he was creating a troubleshooting process independent of the ship's potentially compromised systems. "Think of it as a separate brain," Jackson explained to a cluster of Voxarians. "When your primary neural network can't be trusted, you need an external perspective." Across the chamber, Tanya Wilson had commandeered a storage compartment and converted it into an impromptu parts fabrication area. Using materials scavenged from both ships, she was constructing components that didn't exist in either vessel's inventory. "What is that device?" asked a Voxarian technician, watching her hands move with practiced efficiency. "Manual bypass valve," Tanya replied without looking up. "Your coolant system is too integrated. We need something that can be operated independently of your ship's control systems." "But our specifications require quantum-level precision," protested the technician. "That appears to be made of mechanical parts." Tanya grinned. "Sometimes low-tech is the best tech. This beauty won't crash when your systems glitch, because it doesn't have any programming to crash." The greatest cultural shock came when Devin Parker began physically cutting into a section of crystal conduit, A collective gasp echoed through the engineering section as his plasma cutter sliced through material the Voxarians considered sacred technology. "Stop!" cried Maintenance Supervisor Pelvor, rushing forward. "Those pathways contain centuries of accumulated data patterns." "Relax," Devon said, continuing his work with steady hands. "I'm following the quantum resonance lines. The data will reintegrate once we restore proper flow." "How can you possibly know that?" demanded Pelvor. "I don't," Devon admitted cheerfully. "But Jake does. He's got a feel for this stuff." The concept of feeling technology, rather than analyzing it through sophisticated instrumentation, was so foreign to the Voxarians that several simply walked away, unable to process the cognitive dissonance. Meanwhile, Dr. Leah Anderson had formed an unlikely partnership with Science Officer Krellmore. Together, they were developing a solution for the crystallization problem that had caused the initial failure. "Your coolant contains self-replicating nanobots programmed to maintain optimal viscosity," Lee observed, studying a sample under a portable microscope. "But they've evolved an unexpected crystalline shell in response to the gas giant's unique radiation signature." "Evolved?" Krellmore's skin pulsed with alarm patterns. "That's impossible. They're programmed, not biological. Any sufficiently complex program can develop unexpected behaviors," Leah countered. "What you're seeing is a form of artificial adaptation. Fascinating, actually." Their theoretical discussion was interrupted by a triumphant shout from Jake, who had disappeared into a maintenance shaft deemed too small for humanoid access. He emerged covered in iridescent coolant but grinning broadly. "Main blockage is cleared," he announced. "Tanya, we'll need that bypass valve in 10 minutes. Devon, how's that secondary line coming?" "Almost there," Devon called back. "Just need to seal these connection points." Captain Zixtal observed this chaotic, but evidently effective process with growing fascination. "Your crew lacks our technological sophistication," she remarked to Captain Martinez, "yet they work with remarkable adaptability." "That's humanity in a nutshell," Martinez replied. "We've learned to work with what we have, not what we wish we had. Space doesn't care about your technology level when things go wrong." The engineering section suddenly dimmed as Jake connected Tanya's bypass valve. For 3 heartbeats, nothing happened. Then the luminous systems began humming with renewed energy. Crystalline panels throughout the ship illuminated in sequence as power flowed through pathways that had been dormant for days. "Life support restored to full functionality," reported Jackson, checking his makeshift monitors. "Propulsion systems coming online. Navigation and communication will need about 30 minutes to recalibrate." The Voxarians stared in disbelief at their ship's status displays, which now showed green indicators where red warnings had persisted despite days of automated diagnostic attempts. "How did you accomplish in hours what our systems couldn't resolve in days?" asked Krellmore, his skin now displaying patterns of genuine respect. Jake wiped coolant from his face with a rag, leaving smears rather than removing the substance. "Because we didn't ask the ship what was wrong," he said simply. "We looked for ourselves." The transformation of the luminous mess hall into an impromptu classroom continued into its 3rd-day cycle. What had begun as a simple repair operation had evolved into something neither crew had anticipated: genuine cultural exchange. In the center of the room, Jake had established a workbench surrounded by curious Voxarians. Their initial horror at his casual handling of tools had given way to fascination as they observed the efficiency of his methods. "The key is understanding the relationship between the tool and its purpose," Jake explained, demonstrating the proper grip on a ratchet wrench. Each design evolved to solve specific problems. A junior Voxarian engineer named Melitor gingerly accepted the tool, her 4 hands awkwardly positioning themselves around the handle. "Our manipulator appendages evolved for precision, not force application," she noted. "That's actually an advantage," Jake replied. "Try holding it with 2 hands for stability, and 2 for fine adjustments." Melter repositioned her grip and was rewarded with a satisfying click as the ratchet mechanism engaged perfectly. Her skin rippled with colors that the humans had learned to recognize as pleasure. "I felt that," she said with evident surprise. "The mechanical feedback transmitted directly through my tactile sensors." Jake nodded. "That's what we call feel in mechanical work. The tool becomes an extension of your body, not just something you're controlling." Across the hall, Dr. Leah Anderson was engaged in a spirited theoretical discussion with Science Officer Krullmore and several Voxarian physicists. Holographic models of spatial phenomena hovered above their table as they debated the finer points of faster-than-light travel methodology. "Your approach to quantum folding is fascinating," Lee admitted, manipulating the display to highlight a particular waveform. "You've basically eliminated the Hawking radiation problem that's plagued our drives. Yet your gravitational slingshot techniques achieve similar velocities with far less energy expenditure," countered Krullmore. "We considered such methods primitive until observing your ship's approach trajectory." Leah laughed. "Sometimes the old ways work best. Newton's laws still apply, even at near-light speeds." The most unexpected development occurred in the far corner, where Communications Officer Lithmar, initially the most reluctant to engage with humans, had become engrossed in conversation with Commander Lisa Wright about cultural development. "Your species evolved together in close proximity," Lithmar observed. "Ours developed as solitary crystalline entities before achieving collective consciousness. Perhaps this explains our different approaches to problem-solving." Lisa nodded thoughtfully. "Humans had to learn cooperation to survive. When resources are limited, you either work together or perish together. We never experienced such limitations," admitted Lithmarch. "Our homeworld provided abundant energy sources that could be absorbed without competition. We never needed to improvise." "That explains a lot," Lisa replied. "Necessity drives innovation in ways that abundance never could." At the center table, Captain Zixtal had joined Captain Martins for what had become their daily knowledge exchange. Their initial formality had gradually softened into something approaching camaraderie. "Your historical archives mention numerous technological collapses," Zixtal noted, reviewing data on a tablet. "Yet you seem to view these as valuable experiences." Martinez nodded. "Each setback taught us resilience. The colonial blackout of 2194 left 3 settlements without quantum communications for 7 years. They developed an entire analog technology base that later proved crucial during the neural network crisis. Our historical development contains no such disruptions," said Zixtal. "Each technological advancement built seamlessly upon the last in perfect progression." "Perfect progression has its costs," Martinez observed gently. "Without failure, there's no need to develop alternatives." The mess hall quieted as Navigation Officer Trenval entered, followed by Flight Officer Ryan Cooper. The Voxarian officer's movements had changed subtly over the past days, less rigid, more fluid, almost human in their casual efficiency. "We've completed the manual piloting simulations," Trenval announced, her skin displaying patterns of excitement the humans had never seen before. "Using Lieutenant Cooper's techniques, I successfully navigated the asteroid field scenario with only minor collisions." Ryan grinned. "She's a natural once she stopped overthinking it. Got a real feel for the ship's momentum." "Feel," echoed Trenval, testing the word. "Yes, that describes it accurately. I sensed the ship's movements rather than calculating them." She turned to Captain Zixtal with unexpected determination. "I request permission to implement manual piloting protocols alongside our automated systems." A murmur rippled through the gathered Voxarians. Such a request would have been unthinkable days earlier, tantamount to suggesting they revert to primitive technology. Captain Zixtal considered for a long moment, her 4 eyes blinking in sequence. Then, with deliberate ceremony, she extended her hand toward Jake's workbench. "I will learn to use a wrench," she declared, "if you will teach me to feel the ship as Lieutenant Cooper has taught Navigation Officer Trenval." In that moment, both crews recognized that something profound had changed, not just in their immediate circumstances, but in the future relationship between their species. Captain Zixtal stared at the holographic projection of the gas giant's magnetic field with growing concern. The swirling patterns had developed unstable harmonics that pulsed with increasing intensity. Next to her, Dr. Leah Anderson studied the data with a frown. "I've never seen magnetic flux lines polarize that rapidly," Leah murmured. "This solar flare is building up faster than predicted." Science Officer Krellmore manipulated the display to show a three-dimensional representation of the approaching energy wave. "The radiation signature exceeds anything in our databases. Our standard protective protocols will be insufficient." "Captain," Ryan Cooper interjected, "we need to reposition now. That wavefront will hit in approximately 90 minutes, not 3 hours as we initially calculated." Trenval's skin pulsed with distress patterns. Manual navigation through the debris field in such limited time. Her voice trailed off. Captain Martinez stepped forward. "Captain Zixtal, with your permission, we could establish a coordinated movement protocol. Both ships in tandem, using the planet's shadow as a shield." Zixtal hesitated, her four eyes blinking in rapid sequence as she processed the implications. The Lumina possessed superior navigational systems when functioning optimally, but the recently repaired systems remained untested in crisis conditions. The human vessel, while technologically inferior, had proven remarkably resilient. "Explain this coordination protocol," she finally said. Ryan moved to the main navigation console. "The debris field is densest in the approach vector to the planet's shadow. We need to thread both ships through this narrow corridor." He outlined a path with his finger. "Your ship has better sensors, but ours has more responsive manual controls. If we link communication systems, we can navigate as a unit. You see the obstacles, we help you respond to them." "A symbiotic approach," murmured Krellmore, his skin showing patterns of intellectual excitement despite the crisis. "Exactly," Ryan confirmed. "But it requires both ships to operate in manual mode. Your automation protocols might interpret the debris field data incorrectly under electromagnetic interference." Captain Zixtal turned to Navigation Officer Trenval. "Your assessment." Trenval straightened, her posture showing new confidence. "The human approach has merit. Our simulations demonstrated that manual control offers superior response in chaotic environments. The simulations were conducted under optimal conditions," cautioned Security Officer Vrendax. "This will be significantly more hazardous." "Sometimes you have to trust your instincts," Ryan said quietly. The Voxarian command crew exchanged glances, their skin patterns shifting through colors that conveyed complex emotional states the humans couldn't fully interpret. "We will proceed with the coordination protocol," Captain Zixtal decided. "Establish the communication link between our vessels." The next 40 minutes transformed the Lumina's bridge into a scene unlike anything in Voxarian naval history. The elegant, silent operation of thought-controlled systems gave way to verbal commands and physical interactions with hastily installed manual controls. Ryan stood beside Trenval at the navigation station, guiding her hands on the newly implemented control yoke. "Feel the resistance. That's the thrusters compensating for gravitational drift. Don't fight it. Work with it." Trenval nodded, her four hands adjusting to the unfamiliar sensation. "The feedback provides positional data I never received through neural interfaces." Across the bridge, Jake had installed manual emergency overrides on critical systems, working with Engineering Officer Mevalor to ensure the Voxarian crew understood their operation. "These are last resort controls," Jake explained. "If your primary and secondary systems fail under electromagnetic stress, these mechanical linkages will still function." Mevalor examined the crude but effective mechanisms with newfound appreciation. "The elegant solution is not always the optimal solution," he observed, repeating a phrase Jake had used frequently during their repair work. Captain Martinez's voice came through the communication link. "Rusty wrench in position. We're reading increasing magnetic disturbance. The wavefront is accelerating." Dr. Leah Anderson looked up from her sensor readings with alarm. "Energy levels have doubled in the last 10 minutes. Impact in approximately 27 minutes, not 40 as projected." "We're not ready," Vrendak stated flatly. "The manual conversion protocols are incomplete for secondary systems." Captain Zixtal made an immediate decision that would have been unthinkable days before. "Abandon the conversion protocols. We will proceed with what we have. Better partial manual control than complete automated failure." She turned to Trenval. "Take us through the debris field, navigation officer. Trust what the humans have taught you." Trenval's hands tightened on the controls as the massive crystalline vessel began to move. Beside her, Ryan Cooper nodded encouragement. "Remember," he said quietly, "the ship isn't just responding to your commands. It's telling you something with every vibration and sound. Listen to it." The Luminat accelerated toward the debris field just as the first electromagnetic tendrils from the solar flare reached the outer atmosphere of the gas giant, creating spectacular auroras that illuminated the hazardous path ahead. The first electromagnetic pulse hit without warning, sweeping across both ships like an invisible tsunami. On the Lumina's bridge, displays flickered and died in cascading sequence. The crystalline panels that normally pulsed with gentle light went dark, plunging the command center into an eerie twilight broken only by emergency lighting. "Primary systems failure," reported Science Officer Krellmore, his voice unnaturally calm as his skin pulsed with alarm patterns. "Quantum network destabilizing." Captain Zixtal moved with unexpected decisiveness. "Implement emergency protocols. Switch to manual systems." For a heartbeat, the Voxarian crew hesitated. Generations of training had conditioned them to wait for automated solutions. Then Navigation Officer Trenval reached for the physical controls, her forehands moving with newfound confidence. "Manual navigation engage," she announced. "I have vessel control." Across the bridge, the Voxarian officers followed her example, abandoning their neural interfaces for the crude mechanical backups the humans had installed. The transition was chaotic but determined, a cultural shift happening in real time under the pressure of survival. "Communications with the Rusty Wrench are down," reported Communications Officer Lithmar, adjusting a physical dial on his newly installed radio system, attempting to establish alternate channel. The handheld radio Jake had provided crackled to life. "Lumina, do you copy? This is Martinez. Main communications are fried. Switch to backup frequency." Lithmar fumbled with the unfamiliar device before finding the correct button. "We receive you, Captain Martinez. Our primary systems have failed, but manual controls remain operational." "Same here," came the staticky reply. "We're flying on backup circuits and hydraulics. The wavefront was just the precursor. Main flare impact in approximately 12 minutes. We need to accelerate our approach to the shadow zone." Trenval looked to Captain Zixtal, her skin patterns conveying both determination and uncertainty. "The debris field density increases by 64% in the next navigation segment, without sensor guidance. Use what Lieutenant Cooper taught you," Zixtal said firmly. "Feel the ship's response." On the engineering deck, Jake and Devon worked feverishly alongside Voxarian technicians to maintain the few remaining functional systems. The elegant crystalline engine room had been transformed into something resembling an ancient machine shop, with improvised cables and mechanical linkages bypassing sophisticated but vulnerable quantum circuitry. "The hull is channeling electromagnetic energy," Devon observed, watching readings on a handheld device. "It's like the ship's entire skin is becoming a conductor." "That's it," exclaimed Science Officer Krellmore, who had joined them from the bridge. "We could reconfigure the crystalline lattice to function as a dispersal network." Jake looked up from the power coupling he was reinforcing. "You mean intentionally channel the energy through the hull?" "Precisely. The hull material can reorient its molecular structure when subjected to specific resonance frequencies." Krellmore's skin pulsed with excitement patterns. "We could disperse the electromagnetic energy rather than attempting to shield against it. Like a lightning rod instead of an insulator," Jake nodded. "But we'd need to establish the resonance pattern manually. Your automated systems are too damaged to handle the calculations." Krellmore's four eyes blinked in sequence, I can perform the necessary calculations. My species evolved to process multivariable equations instinctively. And I can rig the physical delivery system," Jake added, already reaching for his toolkit. "Hand me that signal generator." On the bridge, the situation deteriorated as the ships entered the densest section of the debris field. Without functional sensors, Trenval was navigating almost blindly, relying on visual observation and the physical feedback from the controls. Obstacle approaching port side, called out Vrendax from the observation position. 30 degrees elevation, closing rapidly. Trenval reacted instinctively, banking the massive vessel with a fluidity that would have been impossible through automated systems. The debris, a jagged fragment of moon rock the size of a small shuttle, scraped past with mere meters to spare. "How did you calculate that trajectory without sensor data?" Vrendax demanded, her skin displaying astonishment patterns. "I didn't calculate," Trenval replied, hands still moving across the controls. "I felt the ship's momentum and responded accordingly." Captain Zixtal watched this exchange with profound realization dawning across her features. This is what the humans meant by instinct overriding intellect. The handheld radio crackled again. "Lumina, this is Martinez. Jake reports they're attempting to convert your hull into an electromagnetic dispersal system. We're implementing the same approach with our ablative armor. It's untested, but..." The transmission cut off as the main electromagnetic wave from the solar flare reached them, bathing both ships in energy levels that overwhelmed even the backup communication systems. In the sudden silence, Captain Zixtal made a decision that would be remembered in Voxarian history. "Continue on course," she ordered, taking hold of the auxiliary navigation controls alongside Trenval. "We will navigate together, as the humans taught us." 3 weeks into their journey toward Voxarian space, the Lumina and the Rusty Wrench traveled in perfect formation through the star-speckled void. The ships had been transformed by their shared ordeal, the Lumina now sporting visible external modifications that would have been considered aesthetic abominations in Voxarian design philosophy before the encounter, while the Rusty Wrench gleamed with sections of crystalline technology that elevated its capabilities beyond standard human engineering. In the Lumina's observation dome, Captain Zixtal and Captain Martinez shared a quiet moment, watching distant stars through the transparent crystalline ceiling. Their relationship had evolved from reluctant cooperation to genuine respect and something approaching friendship. "Your engineer Jake has completely revolutionized our approach to systems integration," Zixtal observed, gesturing to a nearby display showing the ship's modified power grid. The mechanical redundancies he installed saved 3 critical systems during yesterday's power fluctuation. Martinez smiled. "And your science officer, Krellmore's quantum entanglement communications array, has doubled our transmission range. My superiors back home are already requesting the specifications, politely, of course." Zixtal's skin rippled with amusement patterns the humans had learned to recognize. Cultural exchange benefits both societies. This is an unexpected outcome from a simple rescue operation. Below them, in the main engineering section, the daily hands-on hour was in full swing. Jake moved among groups of Voxarian engineers, each focused on different practical skills. Some worked with basic hand tools, others practiced physical wire splicing, and a particularly dedicated group was disassembling and reassembling emergency power couplings with growing confidence. "Remember to trust your tactile feedback," Jake called out, adjusting a young engineer's grip on a calibration tool. "The microvibrations tell you when the alignment is perfect, often before the instruments register it." The engineer, Melter, who had been the first to successfully use a wrench, nodded with understanding. "I can detect a 0.03 variance through touch that our sensors only measure to 0.05 precision," she noted with evident pride. Engineering Officer Mevalor approached Jake with a device that resembled a hybrid between Voxarian crystalline technology and human mechanical design. "We've completed the prototype for the manual override system," he announced. "It incorporates both physical controls and quantum sensitivity. Jake examined the device with appreciation. You've taken our crude backups and elevated them to something elegant but still practical. This is exactly what integration should look like. In another section of the ship, Dr. Leah Anderson and Science Officer Krellmore worked side by side in what had become a joint research laboratory. Holographic models of spatial phenomena hovered around them as they refined their understanding of the electromagnetic event they had survived. Your species' mathematical intuition is remarkable, Lee observed as Krellmore calculated a complex plasma physics equation without computational assistance. You process multivariable problems instinctively, and your experimental methodology brings practical insights our theoretical models often miss, Krellmore replied. The simulation you designed revealed energy transformation patterns we had never considered. Their theoretical work had already yielded practical applications. Divin Parker was implementing a modified shielding system based on their findings, working alongside Voxarian technicians who now comfortably handled physical tools alongside their traditional neural interfaces. The key innovation, Devin explained to his team, is creating shields that adapt rather than resist. We flow with the energy rather than fighting against it. On the bridge, Navigation Officer Tren Val had become something of a celebrity among both crews. Her piloting during the crisis had saved both ships from destruction, and she now conducted daily training sessions on manual navigation for other Voxarian officers. Instruments provide data, but your body provides context, she instructed, echoing Ryan Cooper's teaching. The subtle acceleration shifts, the vibration patterns, these sensations contain navigational information your conscious mind may not recognize but your nervous system processes. Captain Zixtal watched these transformations with a sense of wonder. Her crew had not merely adapted to crisis, they had embraced a fundamentally new philosophy that integrated their advanced technology with physical connection and intuitive understanding. We believed progress meant transcending the physical, she mused to Captain Martinez. Your species showed us that true advancement comes from integration, not abandonment, of our biological heritage. Martinez nodded. And your theoretical understanding has given us insights that might have taken us decades to discover independently. As they spoke, a junior communications officer approached with news. Captain, we've established contact with Voxarian Outpost Delta. They're requesting explanation for our modified appearance and the presence of the human vessel. Captain Zixtal's 4 eyes blinked in sequence as she considered her response. Tell them, she said with quiet determination, that we bring not just a repaired ship, but a new understanding that will transform our future. 1 standard year later, the human diplomatic vessel New Horizon dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Voxarian space. Ambassador Abby Martinez stood on the bridge, her experienced eyes widening at the sight that greeted them. The approach to Crystallis had been transformed. Where once perfectly geometric orbital structures had maintained mathematically precise formations, now a dynamic array of stations and vessels moved in patterns that combined order with practical adaptability. Most striking were the ships, new designs unlike anything the humans had seen before, with crystalline cores surrounded by accessible mechanical systems and clearly visible manual override stations. They've been busy, murmured Jake Reynolds, now serving as chief technical advisor to the diplomatic mission. Those aren't modifications, they're purpose-built hybrid vessels. The communications officer looked up from her station. Ambassador, we're receiving a transmission from Crystallis Central Command. It's Captain Zixtal requesting to come aboard personally. Martinez smiled. Permission granted, of course. When the airlock cycled open 30 minutes later, the human delegation found themselves face to face with a changed Zixtal. The Voxarian captain still carried herself with formal dignity, but her ceremonial uniform now incorporated practical elements, most notably a small tool pouch at her hip that contained what appeared to be a well-used set of precision instruments. Ambassador Martinez, she greeted, extending all 4 hands in the human gesture of friendship they had established. Welcome to Crystallis. Your arrival is timely. The High Council convenes tomorrow to review the final proposals for the Interspecies Engineering Academy. As Zixtal led them through the spaceport, Martinez and her team witnessed firsthand the extent of the changes their encounter had sparked. Young Voxarians worked alongside their elders on exposed ship systems, their hands manipulating both advanced quantum technology and basic mechanical tools with equal facility. Training facilities featured hybrid systems with neural interfaces positioned alongside physical controls. The practical renaissance, as our media named it, spread faster than anyone anticipated. Zixtal explained as they boarded a transport vessel to the surface. When the Lumina returned with its modified systems, conservative factions initially deemed it technological regression. What changed their minds? Jake asked, examining with professional interest the transport's cockpit where a Voxarian pilot operated manual controls despite the availability of automated navigation. Efficiency, Zixtal replied simply. Our first hybrid vessels demonstrated 42% greater adaptability to unexpected conditions. Maintenance cycles decreased by 37%, but most compelling was the Kuiper Belt incident. She explained how a Voxarian research vessel with implemented human redundancy systems had survived a quantum singularity event that would have destroyed a traditional vessel. The crew's ability to manually pilot through distorted space using sensory feedback rather than compromised instruments had saved 47 lives and invaluable research data. That single incident converted our most vocal critics, Zixtal concluded. They could not argue with survival. Upon reaching the capital city, the human delegation was escorted to the High Council chambers, a breathtaking crystalline structure that reflected the light of Crystallis's twin suns in rainbow patterns. Inside, they found additional evidence of the cultural shift. Alongside traditional neural interface podiums stood physical workstations with tactile controls. High Councillor Vex Moore, once the strongest opponent of human primitive methodology, greeted them with unexpected warmth. The human delegation honors us with their presence, he announced, his skin displaying respectful patterns. Your species' contribution to our technological philosophy has created opportunities we had not imagined possible. The formal proceedings that followed revealed the full extent of the transformation. The proposed Interspecies Engineering Academy would serve as the cornerstone of ongoing cooperation, with exchange programs allowing humans and Voxarians to study each other's approaches directly. Research teams had already developed new hybrid technologies that outperformed purely human or purely Voxarian designs. Most significantly, the High Council announced the formation of a joint exploration initiative, human and Voxarian crews working together on ships designed from inception to incorporate both species' strengths. We once believed that technological advancement meant transcending physical interaction, High Councillor Vex Moore acknowledged in his address. The humans reminded us that connection to our tools, to our ships, to the universe itself, requires more than thought. It requires touch, intuition, and the wisdom to know when to rely on each. At the ceremony's conclusion, Ambassador Martinez found herself standing with Captain Zixtal, now Fleet Commander Zixtal, on a balcony overlooking the shipyards where the first truly hybrid vessels were taking shape. When you found us stranded all those months ago, Zixtal said quietly, I believed you were simply fixing our ship. Martinez watched as human and Voxarian engineers worked side by side on a vessel that represented the best of both worlds. Instead, we built something neither of us could have created alone. Zixtal's four eyes blinked in sequence, a gesture that now conveyed thoughtful appreciation rather than distress. She reached into her tool pouch and withdrew a small, well-worn wrench that Martinez recognized as part of the original kit she had gifted the captain. Some lessons, Zixtal said, holding the simple tool that had come to represent so much more, must be held in the hand to be truly understood.